Translate this. The billionaire's voice carried across the room just loudly enough to make nearby conversations slow down. Not stop, just slow down. The way people do when they sense entertainment is about to begin. A few smiles appeared. A few heads turned. And somewhere beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and amber lighting, a young waitress paused with a tray balanced carefully in her hands. Ethan Whitmore leaned back in his chair and smirked. He had built a multi-billion-dollar language technology empire by convincing the world that machines could understand people better than people understood each other. At 39, he was one of the most recognizable CEOs in America. Financial magazines called him visionary. Investors called him unstoppable. Employees called him demanding when he wasn't around. Tonight, he sat at the center of a private dinner inside the Hawthorne, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, hosting executives, diplomats, and international investors whose combined net worth could buy entire city blocks. The room shimmered with wealth. Glass walls overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Waiters moved quietly between tables carrying plates that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. Everything felt polished, controlled, predictable, until Ethan decided to have a little fun. Translate this, he repeated, lifting a leather-bound menu from the table. Several guests chuckled. One investor raised an eyebrow. Another reached for his wine glass, already sensing where this might go. Across from Ethan sat representatives from Tokyo, Paris, Dubai, and Singapore. For countries, for languages, for opportunities to impress the room, or embarrass someone. Ethan's eyes settled on the waitress standing nearby. Naomi Carter, 27 years old. Black, quiet, efficient, nearly invisible to most of the people in the room. The kind of employee wealthy guests rarely noticed unless they needed something. More water, more bread, another bottle of wine. To them, she was part of the furniture, a moving piece of the background. And backgrounds weren't supposed to surprise anyone. Naomi stepped forward politely. Yes, sir. Ethan smiled wider. Not cruelly, not openly, just enough to make the challenge feel personal. I've got something here that needs translating. A few guests laughed. Someone whispered, this should be interesting. Naomi glanced at the menu. Her expression didn't change. The pages contained sections written in multiple languages, included partly as decoration and partly as a tribute to the restaurant's international clientele. Most people barely noticed them. Ethan certainly had. That was the point. The game had already started in his mind. Around the room, attention shifted toward her. The Tokyo delegation exchanged curious looks. A French investor leaned forward. Even the restaurant manager, standing near the bar, appeared uneasy. Naomi felt every eye in the room settle onto her shoulders. She knew this feeling. She had known it her entire life. Being watched without being seen. Judged without being known. Measured before speaking a single word. Earlier that evening, one guest had called her sweetheart without learning her name. Another had mistaken her for someone else on staff. A third had handed her an empty glass without even making eye contact. Small moments. Familiar moments. The kind that piled up quietly over time. Yet Naomi had smiled through every one of them. Because experience had taught her something important. People revealed themselves long before they realized they were being observed. Ethan opened the menu and tapped a section near the middle. Go ahead, he said casually. Translate this for us. More smiles appeared around the table. More anticipation. The atmosphere felt lighter to everyone except Naomi. She looked at the page, then at Ethan, then back at the page. For a brief second, silence settled over the room. The city lights glittered beyond the glass walls. Ice clinked softly inside crystal glasses. Somewhere near the kitchen entrance, a server stopped walking. Everyone waited. Ethan's confidence never wavered. Why would it? In his mind, the outcome was obvious. A billionaire CEO. A room full of powerful people. A waitress carrying a tray. Some stories seemed written before they even began. But sometimes the people standing in the background know something the spotlight doesn't. And sometimes a single sentence can change the direction of an entire room. Naomi lowered her eyes to the page one last time. Then she smiled. The smile on Naomi Carter's face was not the kind that demanded attention. It was small, calm, almost effortless. Yet something about it made several people at the table shift in their seats. Ethan Whitmore noticed it too. He could not explain why, but for the first time that evening, he felt a faint crack in the certainty he carried everywhere. Naomi looked at the page and began speaking. The first words came in Japanese. Smooth. Natural. Not rehearsed. Not hesitant. Her pronunciation flowed with the confidence of someone who had spoken the language for years. Across the table, the representatives from Tokyo straightened immediately. One executive lowered his glass halfway to the table and forgot to finish the motion. Another exchanged a quick glance with his colleague. The room remained silent. Naomi finished the passage and looked up politely. No dramatic pause. No attempt to impress anyone. Just the translation. Ethan blinked once. Then smiled again. Smaller this time. Lucky guess, someone muttered near the far end of the table. A few guests laughed quietly. The tension eased for a moment. Ethan tapped another section of the menu. What about this one? Naomi lowered her eyes. The text was written in French. Elegant script printed beneath the wine selection. Once again she answered immediately. The words rolled off her tongue effortlessly. Rich. Precise. Beautiful. The French investor seated beside Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. His expression changed first. Surprise. Then curiosity. Then something closer to respect. When Naomi finished, he nodded almost instinctively. Perfect, he said softly. The laughter disappeared. Around the room, conversations had completely stopped. Even guests who were not part of the dinner had begun watching from nearby tables. Ethan felt dozens of eyes shifting between himself and the waitress. He was still smiling, but the room no longer felt quite as comfortable as it had 10 minutes earlier. Naomi handed a wine list back to a guest before returning her attention to Ethan. Her movements remained calm, professional, as though none of this mattered very much to her. That confidence unsettled him more than the translations themselves. Most people became nervous under pressure. Most people wanted approval. Naomi seemed interested in neither. The billionaire CEO opened the menu again. This time he selected a paragraph written in Arabic. Try this. His tone remained casual, but something had changed underneath it. The challenge was no longer entertainment. Now it was a test. Naomi glanced down. Then she began speaking. The sounds flowed naturally. Clear. Fluent. Beautifully paced. A diplomat from Dubai slowly set his fork on the table. Another guest whispered something under his breath. The words were lost beneath the growing silence filling the room. Naomi completed the translation and stepped back. Nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. Nobody reached for another joke. The atmosphere had transformed into something entirely different. Curiosity had become disbelief. Ethan could feel it spreading through the room. The same room he had controlled all evening. The same room where every conversation usually bent toward him eventually. Yet now the center of gravity was shifting somewhere else. Toward a woman carrying a serving tray. Toward someone most people had not noticed an hour ago. The restaurant manager stood frozen near the entrance. Several servers exchanged confused looks. One discreetly pulled out a phone beneath a service station. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. He turned another page. Mandarin Chinese. More difficult. More technical. Surely this would slow her down. Naomi glanced at the text for barely a second before speaking again. The response came instantly. Every syllable precise. Every tone controlled. Across the table, a visiting executive from Singapore let out a stunned breath. Another guest whispered, "No way." For the first time all evening, Ethan Whitmore did not have an answer ready. The confidence that usually arrived before every sentence failed to appear. Naomi finished the final translation and looked up politely. Her expression remained unchanged. No arrogance. No satisfaction. No victory lap. Just professionalism. Yet that restraint somehow made the moment even more powerful. The silence that followed felt enormous. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sparkled beneath the night sky. Inside the Hawthorne, nobody seemed interested in the view anymore. Every eye in the room was fixed on Naomi Carter. And somewhere near the back of the dining room, an older man seated alone suddenly stopped moving. His gaze locked onto Naomi with unmistakable recognition. Unlike everyone else, he did not look surprised by what he had just witnessed. He looked shocked for an entirely different reason. The older man rose from his table so abruptly that the movement caught the attention of several nearby guests. He was not loud. He did not need to be. There was a certain kind of authority that arrived without raising its voice. Silver-haired and impeccably dressed, he crossed the dining room with measured steps while dozens of eyes followed him. Naomi noticed him approaching but showed no sign of recognition. She simply adjusted the tray in her hands and prepared to continue her shift. The man stopped a few feet away. For a moment, he studied her face as if searching through years of memories. Then he smiled. Not the polite smile wealthy people used at charity galas. Not the practiced smile reserved for cameras. This one looked genuine. "Naomi Carter?" he asked quietly. The room seemed to freeze again. Naomi blinked. "Yes, sir." The man let out a breath of disbelief. "I cannot believe it." Ethan watched the exchange carefully. Something unexpected was happening. The dinner had already slipped beyond his control, and now another mystery was unfolding in front of him. Several investors exchanged curious glances. One executive whispered, "Who is he?" The answer came quickly. Nearly everyone in the room recognized the man once he turned slightly toward the light. Theodore Bennett, founder of Bennett Global Education, philanthropist, former ambassador, one of the most respected figures in international academic circles. A man whose scholarship programs had helped thousands of students around the world. Theodore looked at Naomi as though he had just discovered a ghost. "It has been years," he said. 6 years, I think." Naomi appeared genuinely surprised. "Mr. Bennett." The name left her lips softly. Ethan noticed something strange. For the first time all evening, Naomi seemed caught off guard. Not intimidated, just surprised. Theodore laughed warmly. "You remember me." "Of course I remember you." A few guests leaned forward. The curiosity in the room had become impossible to ignore. Theodore turned toward the others. This young woman represented the United States at the International Youth Language Summit in Geneva. Several heads snapped toward Naomi. Ethan frowned. Theodore continued. "She was 19 years old." The silence deepened. 19? Someone repeated. Theodore nodded. 19. And she outperformed graduate students from more than 30 countries. A low murmur spread through the room. Naomi lowered her eyes. She looked uncomfortable with the attention. Theodore, however, was not finished. She spoke multiple languages then. "I see she has only become better." Ethan felt the atmosphere shifting again. Earlier, people had viewed Naomi as an amusing surprise. Now they were beginning to see her differently. Not as a waitress who happened to know a few languages. As someone with a story. Someone whose presence in the room no longer fit the assumptions everyone had made, including him. Theodore looked back at Naomi. "I remember your final presentation. You translated between 5 speakers from 5 different countries without notes." A French investor slowly shook his head in disbelief. Another guest whispered, "That is impossible." Theodore smiled. "No. What was impossible was forgetting it." Naomi offered a polite smile, but said nothing. Ethan found himself studying her more closely than before. The confidence, the composure, the complete absence of arrogance. None of it matched the picture he had formed when she first approached the table. For years, Ethan had built businesses around predicting people, understanding behavior, identifying talent. Yet somehow he had failed to recognize the most remarkable person in the room. Theodore folded his hands. Behind his back, "I always wondered what happened to you." A brief shadow crossed Naomi's face. It vanished almost immediately, but Ethan caught it. So did Theodore. The older man's expression softened. "Life happened." Naomi smiled gently. "Something like that." The answer was simple, yet it carried the weight of an entire untold story. Theodore nodded as though he understood more than she had said. Around them, curiosity intensified. Investors, diplomats, executives. They all wanted the same answer now. How did a woman with credentials like these end up carrying trays in a Manhattan restaurant? Before anyone could ask, a voice came from the far side of the table. One of the international partners leaned forward and placed a thick document on the polished wood surface. His expression carried a challenge. "If she is really that talented," he said carefully, "perhaps she can help us with something much more difficult." The document landed softly on the table, but the effect it created was anything but soft. Several executives immediately recognized it. This was not a menu, not a brochure, not a casual piece of paperwork. It was part of a multinational partnership proposal that had been under negotiation for months. The investor who placed it there adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Naomi. "The final section has been causing problems," he said. 3 legal teams reviewed it. 2 translation firms reviewed it. "We still have disagreements about the intended meaning." The room grew still. Ethan knew the document well. His company had been involved in portions of the negotiations. The issue had delayed progress for weeks. Millions of dollars sat on the other side of a single unresolved interpretation. The investor slid the pages toward Naomi. "Would you mind taking a look?" Naomi hesitated. Not because she was intimidated, because she was working. She glanced toward the restaurant manager. The manager, who had spent the last 20 minutes questioning everything he thought he knew about one of his employees, simply nodded. "Go ahead," he said quietly. Naomi placed her tray on a nearby service station and approached the table. The guests watched her carefully. Some leaned forward. Others folded their arms. A few looked skeptical. After all, translating a menu was one thing. Untangling an international business dispute was something entirely different. Naomi scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. She moved with surprising speed. Her eyes tracked across paragraphs filled with legal language, technical terminology, and cross-border compliance requirements. Ethan observed every movement. He expected hesitation. He expected uncertainty. Instead, he saw concentration. Calm concentration. The kind that comes from experience rather than confidence alone. After less than a minute, Naomi stopped reading. "The problem is here," she said. She pointed to a paragraph near the bottom of the page. Several attorneys immediately looked down. "This section?" one asked. Naomi nodded. "The original wording creates a conflict between obligation and recommendation." Confused expressions appeared around the table. Naomi continued. "The French version suggests the action is mandatory. The English version treats it as optional. The Arabic version lands somewhere in the middle. They are not actually saying the same thing." One attorney frowned. "That is exactly what we have been arguing about." Naomi looked up. "Because the translation is technically correct, but the intent is not." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Ethan sat forward. Naomi picked up a pen and carefully underlined several words. The original writer was emphasizing accountability, not compliance. That nuance disappeared during translation. The investor stared at the page. "Can you prove that?" Naomi nodded. Then she explained. One language referenced responsibility. Another implied procedure. A third focused on authority. None captured the underlying meaning completely. Yet when she reconstructed the sentence using the cultural context of the original language, the contradiction disappeared. Silence followed. Not the uncomfortable silence from earlier. This one felt different. Respectful. Thoughtful. Several people reviewed the paragraph again. Heads slowly began to nod. One attorney leaned back in disbelief. Another quietly laughed. "We spent 3 weeks on this." A second lawyer shook his head. 3 weeks. Theodore Bennett smiled knowingly. Ethan remained silent. He could feel the room changing yet again. Earlier, Naomi had surprised people. Now she was solving problems that highly paid experts had failed to resolve. Those were not the same thing. One was talent. The other was mastery. The investor looked at Naomi and smiled. "You may have just saved us several more weeks of negotiations." Naomi offered a polite nod. "I'm glad if it helps." No celebration. No self-congratulation. Just another calm answer. Yet before the conversation could move on, a voice emerged from the far end of the table. An elderly delegate from Eastern Europe who had remained silent all evening slowly closed the document. Then he looked directly at Naomi. His expression carried both curiosity and challenge. "That was impressive," he said. "But there is one language in this room that I doubt anyone here speaks anymore." The elderly delegate's words settled over the table like a challenge issued across generations. He was a distinguished man named Viktor Petrov, a former cultural advisor whose reputation stretched across decades of diplomatic service. Unlike the others, he did not appear impressed by titles, wealth, or corporate achievements. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi. "There is an old regional dialect from my homeland," he said. "Most people under 60 have never heard it spoken. Even among scholars, very few can understand it correctly." Several guests exchanged skeptical looks. Victor reached into his leather briefcase and removed a weathered notebook. The cover showed signs of age. The pages inside looked older still. He opened it carefully, almost reverently, then slid it across the table. "A family journal," he explained. "Passed down for generations. We have translated parts of it, but one section remains disputed. Historians disagree about its meaning." Ethan watched closely. The room had become a stage, yet nobody knew how the next act would end. Naomi accepted the notebook with both hands. For the first time all evening, she did not answer immediately. She studied the page. Lines of unfamiliar. Writing stretched across faded paper. The symbols looked nothing like the modern versions of the language. Guests waited. Seconds passed. Then 10 seconds. Then 20. A few people relaxed slightly. Perhaps this was finally beyond her expertise. Perhaps every extraordinary story eventually found its limit. Naomi continued reading. Her expression remained calm, but her focus deepened. The sounds of the restaurant seemed to disappear around her. The soft music, the quiet conversations from distant tables, the clinking glasses. Everything faded beneath concentration. Finally, she looked up. "This is not exactly a dialect," she said gently. Victor's eyebrows rose. "No." Naomi shook her head. "It is a transition form. The language was changing during the period this was written. That is why modern translators disagree." Victor stared at her. "Go on." Naomi pointed to several phrases. "These words no longer exist in their original meaning. Historians translate them literally. But they were being used metaphorically here." The elderly diplomat leaned forward. His expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. Naomi continued. She explained how one phrase had been interpreted as a discussion about property and inheritance when it was actually describing responsibility and trust. Another passage believed to reference political conflict was really about preserving community traditions during social change. The room grew silent once again. But this silence felt different from every previous one. Earlier people had been surprised, then impressed. Now they were witnessing something that felt larger than talent alone. It felt like understanding. The kind of understanding that connected people across languages, borders, and generations. Victor slowly removed his glasses. For a moment, he simply stared at the notebook. Then he laughed softly. "My grandfather argued exactly this interpretation." Nobody spoke. Victor looked back at Naomi. "For 40 years, scholars told my family he was wrong." Naomi smiled. "Sometimes language remembers things people forget." The old diplomat's eyes glistened slightly beneath the warm restaurant lighting. He closed the notebook with extraordinary care. "Young lady," he said quietly, "that answer may have solved an argument that began before you were born." Across the table, several guests shook their heads in disbelief. One executive whispered, "This cannot be real." Another simply sat back and folded his arms, overwhelmed by what he had witnessed. Ethan Whitmore remained silent longer than anyone. His mind replayed the evening from the beginning. The smirk, the challenge, the assumptions. Every step now felt painfully visible. He had spent years building artificial intelligence systems designed to bridge communication gaps. Yet sitting across from him was someone accomplishing something no software could replicate. She was not merely translating words. She was translating meaning. And those were not the same thing. Then another realization struck him. Naomi had answered every challenge. Every language. Every question. Every document. Yet she had never once tried to prove herself. The room had demanded demonstrations. She had simply responded. Theodore Bennett noticed Ethan's expression and smiled knowingly. But before anyone could speak, a young associate hurried toward the table carrying a tablet. His face looked pale with excitement. "Mr. Whitmore," he said breathlessly, "you need to see this." The young associate held the tablet tightly as he approached Ethan Whitmore. His face carried the expression of someone who had just witnessed a small earthquake. Not destruction, revelation. The kind that rearranged everything people thought they understood. Ethan accepted the device and glanced at the screen. Within seconds, his eyes narrowed, then widened. Around the table, curiosity spread immediately. "What is it?" one investor asked. The associate swallowed. "Someone uploaded a video from tonight." A few guests exchanged amused looks. That alone was hardly unusual. In Manhattan, nearly every remarkable moment found its way online. But the associate continued. "It has already been shared thousands of times." Ethan scrolled. The video showed Naomi standing beside the table earlier in the evening. The first language, then the second, then the third, then the fourth. Every answer, every reaction, every stunned expression from guests who had underestimated her only minutes before. Comments poured across the screen faster than Ethan could read them. People wanted to know who she was. Others wanted to know why she was working as a waitress. Some were already calling her the most interesting person in New York that night. The numbers kept climbing. "How long ago was this posted?" Ethan asked. 23 minutes. The room erupted with disbelief. 23 minutes. The dinner was not even over. Yet the story had already escaped the walls of the Hawthorne and entered the world beyond. Theodore Bennett smiled quietly. He had spent decades watching talent go unnoticed until one unexpected moment forced people to pay attention. This felt familiar. Across the room, Naomi seemed almost unaware of the growing storm surrounding her. She was helping another server organize glasses near a service station. The same calm movements. The same professionalism. As though none of this belonged to her. Ethan found that impossible to understand. Most people would have been celebrating. Most would have been enjoying the attention. Naomi appeared more concerned about completing her shift. One executive leaned toward Theodore. Why did she disappear? Theodore knew exactly what he meant. After Geneva, the older man looked toward Naomi before answering. She received offers from universities, language institutes, international organizations. Several guests nodded. That was exactly what they would have expected. Theodore continued. She accepted one of them. A brief pause followed. Then her mother became ill. The room grew quieter. Naomi left the program 6 months later. No dramatic music. No heroic speech. Just a simple fact. Yet the impact landed heavily. Theodore folded his hands. She became a caregiver. Worked multiple jobs. Put her own plans on hold. Nobody spoke. Suddenly the mystery felt less mysterious. Life had happened. Not failure. Not lack of talent. Responsibility. The kind that rarely appeared on resumes. Ethan stared across the dining room again. The woman carrying trays was no longer a puzzle. She was something far more difficult to process. A reminder. A reminder that potential and opportunity were not always the same thing. The associate refreshed the screen. The view count jumped again. Then again. One clip had already been reposted by a popular business commentator. Another by an education foundation. The story was spreading faster than anyone expected. People are asking for her name, the associate said. Ethan slowly lowered the tablet. For the first time that evening, he felt embarrassed by the memory of his own behavior. Not because he had been openly cruel. In some ways that would have been easier to confront. Instead, he had done something far more common. He had assumed. Assumed he understood someone after seeing only a uniform. Assumed he knew their story after hearing none of it. Assumed expertise belonged in certain places and not others. Around the table, conversations shifted. Nobody wanted to discuss contracts anymore. Nobody cared about negotiations. The subject was Naomi Carter. Yet as the room buzzed with admiration, another message suddenly appeared on the tablet screen. The associate froze. Ethan looked down. A newly posted photograph filled the display. It was nearly 7 years old. The image showed a 19-year-old Naomi standing on an international stage in Geneva beside a panel of distinguished scholars. Beneath the photo was a headline that made Ethan sit perfectly still, because it revealed a piece of Naomi's past that nobody in the room had seen coming. The headline beneath the photograph seemed almost impossible to reconcile with the woman clearing glasses across the dining room. Ethan read it twice to make sure he had not misunderstood. National Language Research Fellowship winner. Youngest recipient in program history. The article described Naomi Carter as one of the most promising linguistic scholars in the country. There were quotes from professors, endorsements from international institutions, predictions about a remarkable future. Yet none of those predictions had mentioned Manhattan restaurants. None had mentioned late-night shifts or carrying trays between tables. The room absorbed the revelation slowly. Theodore Bennett nodded as though the headline confirmed everything he already knew. I remember that year, he said. The competition was extraordinary. Hundreds applied. Only one received the fellowship. A venture capitalist seated nearby looked stunned. She won the entire thing? Theodore smiled. By a wide margin. Across the room, Naomi remained unaware that her past was now being discussed openly. She was helping another server organize dessert menus. The contrast felt almost surreal. One guest looked at the photograph, then at Naomi, then back at the photograph again. Why would someone walk away from that? Theodore answered quietly. Sometimes life asks different questions than ambition. Nobody challenged the response. They understood. More than that, they felt it. Ethan stared at the image. For years he had celebrated stories about perseverance. His company featured them in advertisements. Investors loved them. Audiences loved them. But this was not a story packaged for inspiration. This was real. Messy. Unplanned. Human. The associate refreshed the screen again. New information appeared almost instantly. More articles. More archived interviews. more evidence of a future that had once seemed inevitable. Then another image surfaced. This one captured Naomi standing beside a panel of researchers during a conference in Geneva. Behind them was a banner displaying the event theme, language as human connection. Ethan noticed something else. Even at 19, Naomi wore the same expression she wore tonight. Calm, focused, uninterested in attention. One investor shook his head slowly. She could have been teaching at any university in the world. Theodore glanced toward Naomi. Perhaps. Then he added something that silenced the table. Or perhaps she already became exactly who she was supposed to become. Nobody spoke. The words lingered. Across the dining room, a few guests had started recognizing Naomi from the viral clips online. Quiet conversations spread from table to table. Yet she continued working as if none of it mattered. That, more than anything, impressed Ethan. Fame had arrived unexpectedly. Recognition had arrived unexpectedly. Validation had arrived unexpectedly. But her behavior had not changed. Then a voice interrupted the moment. Viktor Petrov leaned forward and looked directly at Ethan. You know what fascinates me? Ethan turned toward him. Viktor smiled gently. Everyone in this room spent the evening discovering Naomi Carter. He paused. But she has been the same person all along. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Ethan could not argue with it. The change had not happened in Naomi. The change had happened in everyone else's perception. At that exact moment, a senior executive from an international technology firm stood from his chair. His company operated in more than 80 countries. His reputation carried enormous weight in the business world. He looked toward Naomi and spoke loudly enough for the room to hear. Miss Carter. Naomi turned politely. Yes, sir. The executive smiled. I would like to offer you a position. Conversation stopped immediately. Every eye shifted toward him. The executive continued. Not tomorrow. Not next month. Right now. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Because he already knew something important. The offer that was about to be made would not be the only one. And for the first time that evening, the most sought-after person in the Hawthorne was not a billionaire CEO. It was the waitress everyone had overlooked. For a moment, nobody moved. The executive's offer seemed to suspend the entire room between surprise and expectation. Naomi stood quietly beside the service station, her hands folded in front of her apron, while some of the most influential people in the world waited for her answer. The executive smiled. My company operates across 83 countries. We spend millions every year solving communication challenges. What you demonstrated tonight cannot be taught easily. I would like you to lead a new international language initiative. The position is yours if you want it. A low murmur swept through the dining room. The offer alone would have changed most lives. But before Naomi could respond, another voice joined the conversation. That is a strong offer. The speaker was a technology investor from Singapore. But I would like to make one as well. Heads turned. The investor adjusted his jacket and continued. My foundation sponsors educational programs across Asia and North America. We need people who understand cultures, not just languages. I would be honored to discuss a leadership role with you. More whispers followed. Then another offer came. And another. One from an international consulting group. One from a nonprofit organization. One from a multinational communications firm. The evening that had begun with a challenge now felt completely transformed. Earlier, Naomi had been serving guests. Now executives were competing for an opportunity to work with her. Ethan Whitmore watched the scene unfold with growing reflection. Every new offer felt like another mirror held up to the assumptions he had made at the beginning of the night. Yet what happened next surprised everyone even more. Naomi thanked each person sincerely. She listened carefully. She showed appreciation. But she did not appear overwhelmed. She did not rush toward any opportunity. She did not treat the offers as trophies. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions. What would the role accomplish? Who would benefit? What kind of impact would the work create? The executives seemed almost caught off guard. They were accustomed to people chasing positions. Naomi seemed interested in purpose. Theodore Bennett noticed the reactions and smiled. That sounds like the Naomi I remember, he said quietly. Ethan looked toward him. She was always like this? Theodore nodded. Always. He paused before adding. The brightest people often spend less time trying to impress others and more time trying to understand them. The words stayed with Ethan. Around the room, phones continued to light up with notifications. The story had spread far beyond Manhattan now. Media outlets were beginning to pick it up. Influential accounts were sharing clips from the dinner. Thousands of comments continued to pour in. Yet the most remarkable thing was that none of it seemed to change Naomi. She remained exactly as she had been when the evening started. Calm, grounded, present. Then Ethan made a decision. Slowly, he rose from his chair. The room noticed immediately. Conversations faded. He walked across the dining room, toward Naomi. No cameras flashed. No speeches were prepared. The moment felt too personal for performance. When he stopped in front of her, the billionaire CEO who had started the evening with confidence now seemed unusually thoughtful. Naomi, he said quietly. She met his eyes. Yes, sir. Ethan took a breath. I owe you an apology. The room became completely silent. When this evening began, I looked at your uniform and assumed I understood your story. He shook his head slightly. I was wrong. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Ethan continued. Not because you proved something to me tonight. You did not owe me proof. I was wrong because I never should have assumed anything in the first place. Naomi listened without judgment, without triumph, without resentment. The sincerity in Ethan's voice was unmistakable. For the first time all evening, the most important lesson had nothing to do with language. It had everything to do with humility. Naomi smiled gently. Then she gave an answer that left the entire room thinking long after the words were spoken. The good thing about understanding people, she said softly, is that you can start at any moment. For several seconds after Naomi spoke, nobody seemed eager to break the silence. Her words settled over the room with a quiet power that no presentation, contract, or negotiation could match. The good thing about understanding people is that you can start at any moment. It was such a simple sentence. Yet it carried more wisdom than many of the business books lining executive office shelves across America. Ethan Whitmore nodded slowly. He had spent years studying communication. Tonight, a waitress had taught him something deeper than communication. She had taught him perspective. Around the dining room, conversations resumed, but the tone had changed completely. Earlier, people had been evaluating Naomi. Now they were learning from her. The difference mattered. Theodore Bennett eventually rose from his chair and approached Naomi. I have a feeling this is not the last time the world hears your name, he said warmly. Naomi smiled. I am not sure the world needs to hear my name. Theodore laughed. Perhaps not, but it could certainly benefit from hearing your voice. Nearby guests nodded in agreement. One by one, executives, diplomats, investors, and scholars approached her. Some thanked her for solving problems that had frustrated teams for weeks. Others thanked her for reminding them that talent often exists in places people overlook. A few simply thanked her for the lesson. Meanwhile, online attention continued growing. News outlets picked up the story. Educational organizations shared the clips. Students commented that they finally saw someone who looked like them being recognized for intelligence rather than stereotypes. Teachers shared the video with classrooms. Parents shared it with their children. What began as a dinner conversation had become something larger. Yet Naomi remained remarkably unchanged. As the evening finally drew to a close, she returned to collecting menus and helping her co-workers finish their responsibilities. The same co-workers who now looked at her with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. One server shook her head and smiled. You could probably run half the companies represented in this room. Naomi laughed softly. I think I will start by helping close the restaurant. Even that answer somehow felt perfectly consistent with everything people had learned about her. Before leaving, Ethan approached her one final time. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows, painting the glass with reflections of Manhattan's endless energy. I would still like to speak with you about opportunities, he said. Naomi nodded politely. I would be happy to have a conversation. Ethan smiled. A conversation, not an interview. That sounds fair. They shook hands. No contracts. No announcements. Just mutual respect. Sometimes the most important partnerships begin that way. As guests slowly departed into the New York night, Viktor Petrov paused near the exit and looked back toward Naomi. Languages connect people, he said. But character earns trust. Then he disappeared into the crowd. Long after the dining room emptied, one image remained in the minds of everyone who had been there. Not the billionaire. Not the executives. Not the offers. A young black waitress standing calmly beneath warm restaurant lights, answering challenge after challenge without arrogance, resentment, or pride. She did not need to raise her voice. She did not need revenge. She did not need recognition. She simply revealed what had been true from the beginning. Intelligence does not wear a uniform. Dignity does not require permission. And sometimes the most important person in the room is the one nobody bothered to notice until it was impossible to look away. The evening had started with a test. It ended with a lesson. Not about language. Not about business. Not even about success. It was about seeing people clearly before life forces you to. Because power may open doors. Wealth may command attention. Titles may impress strangers. But respect remains the one language every human being should learn first.